So, in conclusion, if you're Anya Taylor-Joy and you're watching this, feel free to slide into my DMs, okay? Howdy friends, and welcome to my channel. If you're watching for the first time, welcome. I'm making a video for the first time, so let's go on this adventure together. Today I'm talking about one of my favorite pieces of media ever, The Queen's Gambit, and no, it's not about how lovely Anya Taylor-Joy is as an actress. That might have been a better video, actually. But oh well. This is specifically going to be about how The Queen's Gambit displays the realities of gifted kid burnout. Obviously, there's gonna be some spoilers for the show and for the book as well. There aren't a ton of differences, but I will be pinpointing a couple of them, and they do spoil parts of the book. In case you haven't seen the show, which you totally should if you ever get the chance, it all centers around Beth Harmon, who is orphaned as a child and learns to play chess while at the orphanage thanks to the janitor, Mr. Scheibel. The orphanage gives out tranquilizers, and Beth develops a dependency on them as a child to the point of consuming a crap ton and subsequently being banned from chess, because that punishment fits the crime. Years later, she is adopted by the Wheatleys and is finally given the chance to play chess and take those pills once again. I can't stress enough how entirely wild this is to me. This girl played chess in her head for years and then wiped the floor with all of her competitors at her first ever tournament. This girl didn't even know how chess clocks worked. I say that like I know how chess clocks work, or how chess really works in general. Anyway, she quickly makes a name for herself in the chess world as a prodigy and makes enough money off of tournaments that taking care of herself and her adoptive mother isn't an issue. What Beth does consider an issue is Borgov, the Russian chess player who has been the world champion for years. She goes toe-to-toe with him a few times and really falls into her drug addiction during this process, thinking that she needs the pills and alcohol in order to play better and play well enough to defeat Borgov. However, after some intervention from the friends that she's made over the years, Beth overcomes her addiction and own personal conflict and beats Borgov in chess at the end. So, I'm not going to say this is a perfect piece of media. It falls into some different stereotypes with things such as the black best friend trope, and it may not be realistic for a young woman in the 1960s to become a world-renowned chess player with such little backlash. But let me have my wish fulfillment fantasy, okay? But overall, the message of working with others in order to achieve your goals and ultimately realizing that other people aren't the enemy is just compelling to me. It feeds the soul, you know? Specifically, it ends up showing gifted kid burnout at its true core and how it is possible to overcome it. Something that was left out of the Netflix series adaptation that I wish they kept from the book was Beth's original match against Borgov in Paris. In the show, it shows that she was hungover from a night of drinking and partying, and she's late to the game, and it's clear that all of these factors combined contribute to her loss of the match. However, in the book, Beth goes to Paris having prepared for this match in every way she can. She studied the night before, she's well rested the day of, and despite all of her best efforts to be better and all of the improvements that she has made, she still loses the match. I understand that the former gave some interesting visuals specifically at the beginning, and that we wouldn't have had the character of Cleo without it, but the latter does best explain Beth's spiral into addiction and isolation from everyone around her. At least, it does to me. Plus, I'm just able to relate to doing everything that you can for that one thing you're supposed to be really, really good at, only to not quite come out on top despite how much you really did do to prepare. It's a punch to the gut, honestly. And to me, the book version of the Paris match best explains the beginning of Beth's descent into what I would refer to as gifted kid burnout. In case you don't know what that is, I've got a really official definition from the Urban Dictionary that defines it as when children who were once considered the gifted or smart kids in class grow up to underperform academically and likely socially. Okay, so Beth wasn't exactly a gifted kid in the same way that a good chunk of kids are today, what with being handpicked by teachers in elementary school and being told, you have a reading level of a college student at 10, you're basically a genius. But I think we can apply a lot of these things to her experience as a child prodigy, because while we do see her work and practice to be better at chess, she obviously has a natural talent for the game. Not all of us can see an entire chessboard with moving pieces and the whole shebang, after all. And maybe I'm projecting a tiny bit as a former gifted kid with some gifted kid burnout myself. But after doing a good chunk of reading, Beth does exhibit some of those signs. And I'll go ahead and start with a big one. Social emotional issues. This is one that Beth has in spades. This, of course, is not just because she's good at chess, but because of her own childhood trauma and a lack of people her own age with common interests. The only character close to her age that she has positive interactions with is Jolene, who we'll get to in a minute. Everyone else is significantly older than her, even if she does have positive interactions with them, so it makes sense that she isn't great with socializing around her peers for a bulk of the show. Also, a journal from Cambridge that I'll link below lists some factors that can contribute to social difficulties. For example, social isolation, which is heavily implied throughout the show, as well as perfectionism. Beth has a huge problem with perfectionism, but don't we all? It shows in her need to win every single chess match that she plays. While she obviously enjoys the game, in both the show and book, it's plain to see that what she really enjoys about it is winning. This contributes to some of her biggest losses, such as her loss to Benny Watts in Las Vegas. She becomes so obsessed with defeating her opponents and having the perfect move combinations that she almost blocks herself from winning in a way by looking for things that just aren't there, like the doubled pawns, for instance. And every time that she does lose, she takes it to heart. To her, chess isn't just a game, it's way more than that. To be beaten by someone else means a personal failing on her part. Notice that in both versions of the story, she has her worst spiral after losing to Borgov for the second time. Even when given the chance to wallow in her failure with company, she rejects Benny and chooses to lock herself away at home. The only reason she gets pulled out of her spiral in the show is because Jolene suddenly comes to Beth to check in on her, despite having not seen her in years. Now, this brings up Beth's lack of object permanence when it comes to the people who do care about her. I'll give the book credit for having Beth reach out to Jolene in the midst of her spiral to get help, but the way the show does it makes it seem like the only purpose of side characters is to help Beth. And I mean, she is the main character, and this part could just be nothing more than the writers not wanting to flesh out side characters more than necessary. But I'm going to use it to contribute to Beth's social-emotional issues. Every time it's someone like Harry Beltic or Benny Watts offering to teach her more about chess, and once she really doesn't have a need for these characters anymore, they just aren't present, and she doesn't make any effort to check in on them or see how they're doing. And don't even get me started about the way she never even paid back Mr. Scheibel for that first tournament, or said anything to him at all after she left the orphanage. It really breaks my heart every time I think about that scene where Beth goes into Mr. Scheibel's office and sees all of those newspaper clippings. It really makes me tear up every time I watch the show, which has been 5 times, which is kind of a lot. But enough about Beth's social life. Let's talk about her failure avoidance. In the same Cambridge journal, failure avoidance is mentioned as something gifted students were believed to be at risk for. Failure avoidance is just as it sounds, where you attempt to avoid failure. This can be seen in Beth a couple of times. Once is after the US Championship, where Beth talks to Benny about not going to the tournament in Moscow because of how many Russian players would be there, and then possibly not even going to the Paris tournament in the first place. It's clear that she doesn't want to risk losing to other players who may be better than her, thus damaging her reputation as a chess player, since she isn't old enough to be considered a prodigy at this point in the series. Another time Beth displays failure avoidance is when she realizes that she has to compete at the Kentucky State Chess Tournament. I'm going to share this quote from the book that happens right after she gets off the phone with the guy who reminds her of the tournament in the middle of her huge bender. I'm bringing out the book, so that's how you know stuff's about to get real. She felt frightened, and she did not want to play chess. She had not looked at a chess book or touched her pieces since buying the house. If you've seen the show, you know that she bought the house really soon after losing the chess match in Paris to Borgov. So this proves that after what she considers one of her biggest failures, she puts away the chess, and it's to a point where she feels anxious about competing when this is a state-level tournament that she could probably do in her sleep if she wasn't half drunk during it. And this part isn't in the show, but in the book, Beth does compete in the Kentucky tournament and loses her first match to someone whose score level is well below her own, and she then quits, claiming that she's sick. Now, there is more than just Beth's perfectionism, lack of social skills, and fear of failure that contribute into her being her own antagonist. It's clear in the book and show that she suffers from an addiction to both the tranquilizer pills and the alcohol. She also deals with trauma that would come from her mother, as it's implied in the flashbacks of the show. This is something that the Cambridge Journal adds in the end, pointing out that factors aside from an individual's talents can determine one's social skills and overall mental health. Something that's also interesting to tack onto this outside factors tangent is the term and study of the gifted. While this study began in 1921, it continued for over 70 years, and a piece that I think is really relevant here is that the group that was told they were gifted when they were in around grade school or 14 at the oldest were around 50% more likely to say that they hadn't reached their full potential versus their counterparts who found out that they were part of a gifted kid study later on in life. I will also link the analysis of this study below because it's really interesting to look into. So it could be possible that learning of her immense skills at a young age also didn't help Beth when it came to her own issues and her isolation from everyone else. And for all of us former gifted kids out there, it turns out that it may have been better for our own mental health to not have known where we were in terms of our own intelligence. Who knew? So, obviously it's too late for any of us formerly gifted kids to unlearn the fact that we were smart at one point or another, which is probably why a lot of us take to self-deprecating comments and memes about once having had the reading level of a college student and now not being able to read any books at all. I'm not talking about myself. Come on. I read this entire book, like, almost 2 months ago. But still, give me credit. It turns out being a college student is harder than having a college reading level. Never would have guessed. Luckily for us, the Queen's Gambit doesn't leave us on the dreary note of Beth succumbing to her addiction and instead shows us what can be done to get back on the horse that is life itself. So it's not exactly as easy as the show makes it look. All they did was show Jolene and Beth hanging out a couple of times and then bam, she was off to Russia. It was a miracle that Beth wasn't having withdrawals for the entire tournament the way that they made it look. Instead, in the book, it shows that Beth reaches out to Jolene to get help with getting her life back on track. Jolene pushes her to take care of herself in forms of exercise and eating well, and she's able to help her find college students to clean her house through the Help Wanted ads at her college. There's a process to getting your life back on track, and it involves reaching out to people around you and asking for help when you need it. You can't always expect an old friend to come knocking on your doorstep when you need it the most. Having people on your side to help you along the way is also important in more than just getting your life back on track. It's those people that can help you see what your options are. My favorite part of the whole series has to be when Beth is surprised with the call of Benny and all of her friends that she's made over the years while competing in chess. It's unfortunately not in the book, but I'm really glad that they included it in the series. Sometimes it's when you least expect the help that you end up getting it. And for Beth, it ended up being enough. Her friends were able to give her a slight edge on the remaining part of the match, and she was able to learn that she didn't need the pills and alcohol after all in order to be an amazing player. Showing that a lot of the time we're better off with our own minds than we tend to give ourselves credit for. While not all of us are orphan chess prodigies with an addiction, all of us have been screwed over in some way, shape, or form by the education system. Even if you weren't a gifted kid, there's a good chance that you felt burnt out by the expectations around you. And there's no shame in asking people for help. In fact, it can be one of the best ways to build trust with those around you. So, in conclusion, if you're Anya Taylor-Joy and you're watching this, feel free to slide into my DMs, okay? But actually, we can see the way that gifted kid burnout impacts a former child prodigy like Beth Harmon. Obviously, she isn't a perfect example, but I'm willing to bet if you were considered smart in elementary school, you probably related to at least one or two of Beth's personality traits. Which is why it's all the more important to realize that no one has to stay burned out forever. It's important to take time to nurture yourself and to be gentle with yourself as well. Don't feel shame for asking for help from your support system. They want to see you grow and succeed. If you enjoyed this, I really hope you'll like this video and maybe comment your thoughts as well. I have a ton of thoughts about this series and the book that I will likely share in the future. So if that interests you, or if the idea of analyzing pieces of media to see how they can relate to people or society at large is up your alley, you should click that subscribe button and ring the bell so you can see what I come up with in the future. I hope you have a good rest of your morning, day, or night. Bye.